All right. Well, welcome back to another Coaches Chat. This one looks a little bit different. We have Laura here with us today. Thought we'd mix it up a little bit. And also this theme is a little bit different for this month as well. This month we wanted to take the time and opportunity to showcase our athletic population within the community. And on top of that, how the protocols that we use on that athletic population in order to support their performance, their recovery, their well-being, how that can actually provide some guidelines for the rest of our community, the recreational athletes, more general population, all that sort of thing. So actually, Ben, you've shared with me before pretty good metaphor that kind of explains this to do with race cars. If you want to share that with everyone.
Yeah, for sure. So the metaphor is essentially, if you decide to go out and buy a BMW, well, you might not necessarily have any intention of racing that car, but just because you're not going to race your car doesn't mean that your car's not benefiting from the fact that like BMW have a race team, right? And the irony of that metaphor is like, I'm not really into car racing, so I hope BMW do have a race team, but even if they don't, like you understand what I'm trying to say. And I think that's the best thing about our community really is how much of a wide ranging spectrum of individuals we have and where they kind of fall, either side of like super competitive. We've got Rolf, who's, perennial games athlete now looking to make her charge this month. And we've had, in the past, like Mike Bensick, weightlift for Canada at the Commonwealth Games, and more locally here, like Cam Kushler, like just missed out on Torian, and Dexter Todd won Oceania Teens Division, and Jack Fleming. So we've got this like really cool and growing group of super high level, super dedicated athletes. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, we have, I guess, people that are kind of more like ourselves, where it's like, yeah, maybe jump in for like a local comp and like to do well and obviously put enough time into my training that I want to be getting better. But I also am aware that like I'm not going to the games or I'm not going to any kind of significant meet. But I guess the point of this month is just to show that, just because my goals around athletic performance or the community goals around their athletic performance might not be to be the best in the world, it doesn't mean that they can't benefit from the different protocols and the different things that we're doing with those that do have those aspirations, right? And that, it's funny because as coaches, we all have this like different kind of population of clients that kind of take our heart, right? That we really want to make a big impact with. And for me, like I see, guys like Cam, for instance, like Cam's a robot when it comes to his like training and nutrition, which like is awesome. Because if I said to Cam, hey, there's this really exciting new piece of research that comes out and says, like, if you only eat tomatoes for the next 3 months, like that's going to improve your performance by 1%. Cam would just eat tomatoes for the next 3 months, right? Like that's how badly he wants it. Like he's willing to do that. Whereas you're probably not going to get that same response from someone who's just had their third child and balancing like trying to return to work with all the other like complications and challenges that come with like a young family, right? So just because that percentage of the population aren't looking to go to the games, it doesn't mean that there's not lessons that we can't learn that we can then apply backwards. And the exciting thing too is the opposite is also true, and athletic careers tend to have a shelf life, right? Like a shelf life, like it's not necessarily going to be a forever thing. So there's going to come a time when those that are our top level athletes now decide that like their goals change, or maybe their priorities change, or maybe it's time to start a family or whatever it is. And having the experience we have with that side, I think is going to put us in a really good and useful position for our clients to help make that transition. So this month that was a little bit more long-winded than I anticipated it to be, but I think this month what we're trying to do is just demonstrate the power of MTMM with working with this very inclusive, very wide-ranging spectrum of individuals. That information, like it flows both ways. And specifically this month with all the kind of return to competitive activity, particularly in the CrossFit scene, we really want to showcase the things that our athletic, population are teaching us and the lessons that are useful, so that even if you're not an athlete, you realize you can benefit from having these people within our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked about the spectrum of athletes, right? So we have the more recreational athletes and the highly competitive athletes. And then over here on the other end of the full spectrum, we have people who may not even be a part of any sort of sport or athletic pursuit. But I think what's really neat is to see how, as a community, we are very inclusive in terms of, everybody that's around. And I think, some of us who kind of fall in the very middle of the spectrum at large can really see and feel how that comes to life. I feel like Laura's mentioned something like this before to me.
Yeah, and I think also with that, having the inclusivity and kind of having that broad range, it's allows you to also move within that spectrum depending on what phase of life you're in, right? So maybe, you're busy with work or your family and you're a little bit more on the recreation side, but if you do choose to, jump into a competition or want to take it up a notch, the community is also there to kind of support you and take what we've learned from those athletes and apply it as well. So can kind of take you through a lot of life stages.
Yeah, I even as a coach can kind of feel that inclusivity, and Kat's not here, but I'm sure she in part would as well, right? Going from competitive athlete to mother, right? And within our community, we have many of both. And so I think she could find, people to connect with that are parts of both of those worlds, right? And, it is difficult. And I've, there's been a few actually recent intakes that I've done with new clients who have come from a competitive background, but then life happens and they, are no longer in a competitive sport and they kind of feel really lost. And that's something that I can connect with them on too, in times, because coming from competing regularly at a high level and then going to, the goal being more recreational in terms of competitions and training and everything like that. It is a difficult switch to make, but when you have this community behind you, it makes it a lot easier, a lot more cushiony.
I think there's a lot in that. And I think maybe the first thing we need to do is define athlete, right? Because specifically in this context, I think that we're defining athletes within our community as people who are primarily working with us as a way to increase their athletic output and performance and recovery, right? And I think the reason we need to I would typically define an athlete as anyone who's training with an intention to get better, regardless if it's your primary source of income or it's just for fun. If you're going in and you're spending time in the gym or in the pool or on the track or whatever it is that your form of activity is with an intent to get better, I'm going to dub you as being athletic or being an athlete, right? But I think the reason that we do separate it a little bit more within our community is because even if you don't necessarily come to us doing any kind of activity, we understand as an approach to holistic improvement of health, we want activity to become part of your regular routine, right? Even if there's no intention to go to the games or step on a platform or go to a meet, we want you active. And it might just start with a few walks around the block, right? But again, once we get you moving and moving consistently, there's going to be things that we amend in your nutrition program and your recovery program that then have to change because of that increase in activity, right? So I think that that's important to note that whether you come to us and you're not really doing anything or it's been 5 or 6 years since you've been into the gym, we're going to want you moving in some regards. So in that kind of first notch, it's you may not self-define yourself as an athlete, but you're becoming more athletic, right? Mm-hmm. I think the transition element too, back and forth, and Kat's probably been the best example of this, but it is quite hard and you do feel a little bit empty because we kind of talk about, identifying, right? Or having on an identity level, who you believe yourself to be. And if you attach things to who you are that can change, there's a level of danger in that without that thing, you don't know who you are, right? And again, we talk a lot with our clients about, what are your values? Who, and that's really that's asking us who are you? Who are you? What's important to you? What do you stand for? And if you define yourself as a CrossFitter or as a weightlifter or as a vegan, then what happens when things change? It is a little bit of well, without that, then who am I? And so I guess that's another conversation to be had on the importance of understanding your value system and not your occupation as a part of who you are as a person. But yeah, the evolution that we've seen of the different clientele that we have, I mean, maybe it's it's no coincidence that it's developed a lot, I guess, as Kat and my life has personally changed as well. You know, when we first started and Kat was making runs at nationals, well, of course, the majority of your clientele are going to come from that circle and that gym. So you start working with other weightlifters who are at a similar level and CrossFitters who were at Dynasty. And then you kind of go into competitions, you're growing outward a little bit there. But the athletic community, I think, has always been quite a staple of our client base because they understand the value of health and the importance of diet and nutrition and recovery, probably more so than the general population at this point. You know, I think thankfully that pendulum is starting to come back the other way. I think that many people are starting to understand, you know, and COVID's probably been a big part of that too, and our shift to try to get that message out. But I think for so long, the perception has been that health or, you know, dietary protocol and stuff like that is purely just been for athletes, and that if you're not an athlete, it's not something that concerns you or that you need to worry yourself about, you know. And Kat being an ICU nurse and cardiac specialist, the idea for first and foremost was to like try to get to those people before they were in the bed having the, you know, the heart breakdowns and the transplants and the pacemakers and everything like that. So it's definitely been the biggest challenge I think we've faced as a business is how do we build that bridge between those that already understand the value but are already at the top 10% in terms of health within the community to those that probably need our help the most but see the value of what we do the least, right? That's inherently been the challenge for so long. And I think that months like this where we can have these conversations about information flow back and forth between those two groups help to kind of solidify that bridge between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, you know, when we are identifying the different athletes within our population, it then becomes, you know, what particularly are they working towards? You said that they are working towards bettering themselves, right? Being better. But I think that's kind of where it diverges, right? Like, are they trying to be better in a specific sport? Are they trying to be better in terms of their health? Are they trying, and obviously, you know, athletics and performance also plays into that. Are they trying to be better in terms of feeling better about themselves in terms of what they can do? Like, there's so many different avenues that you can go with that as well. And like you said, those all define in our minds an athlete. But I think it can just get a bit complicated in terms of what the mainstream definition of athlete is, I think.
Yeah. I think the challenge is getting your athletic population to not only identify as an athlete and then getting our non-athletic population to at least identify on some level as athletic, right? Yeah. Like, and kind of that's the conundrum that we're kind of working between and trying to demonstrate, right?
Yeah. And I think, you know, goals are always different for everyone, but especially in these different kind of groups of people that we do serve. And not only their goals in terms of performance or what they're looking to achieve, but also how they're going to achieve that. And I think that's also something that can be taken from group to group, from side of the spectrum to side of the spectrum, in terms of trying different methods of, you know, whether it be tracking, whether it be more visual, whether it be not tracking for a little while. All those sorts of things are, you know, going to be very individual, but I think it's important for, you know, our elite level athletes to know that just because they're an elite level athlete doesn't mean they have to be tracking to the dime every day of their life. And same with, you know, the other end of the spectrum, maybe, you know, they want to try tracking and to perfection and see, you know, what their body can do with that, but they're a bit more comfortable perhaps with letting the reins a bit loose, right? And our athletic population can take from that and vice versa. And it's a lot of lessons in all of it.
I think, yeah, having a client who's fearful to start weighing and measuring and tracking is not dissimilar to having an athlete who's fearful of not weighing and measuring and tracking, right? So, yeah, I agree with you, Mags.
So when we take, you know, the scientific methods that are being, you know, tried and tested on athletic population or like very elite level athletic populations, and applying those downstream, you know, same goes for behavioral, you know, research that we are maybe starting to apply on this end of the spectrum, but then we also bring that over to the athletic side of or the elite level athlete side of the spectrum too. So it's just interesting to see how those kind of go in opposite directions as well.
Laura, you got to get in quick in these chats.
I know. And I had one thing on your point of goals, Maggie, like you see a lot of people, what defines their athletic goals? Like, are they looking to get better in a sport or, just move their body more? And I think there's factors like optimizing our nutrition, like around our workouts that, yes, we may have like tested that with elite level athletes, but they still make a huge difference in recreational athletes' lives. Like a lot of people go to the gym and it's, their outlet, their time to themselves, like seeing that kind of progress and being able to have those goals even outside of their daily work, that their kind of, life, I think is huge for people, and being able to optimize that and use those techniques is huge and can make a huge difference. So those goals I think are, obviously just as valid and as important, and can benefit from all of the things of those like elite athletes.
Fuel your highest potential, fuel your potential. That's our tagline, right? And I think that's something that with somebody who may not think or identify as an athlete themselves, that's what we are almost supporting them and guiding them towards, is realizing what their potential is and whatever it is that they're doing. And maybe that does then become a pursuit, but if not, at the very least, they're starting to realize what their potential is and whatever it is that they're doing.
I definitely want to touch on the fact that we have a number of clients within our community who are in their 50s and their 60s and their 70s, because I think the other side of the argument sometimes for, again, that like non-specifically athletic population is it's too late. Like it's too late. Like I'm in my 40s or I'm in my 50s or, and I haven't done anything for 10 or 15 years. And I think the truth is that we understand that there's no population group that cannot benefit from resistance training and a little bit of additional activity regularly. And I think when, my argument would be actually it's getting more important, not less important, the older that you get. And we know that, you look at different tests that they're doing now as predictors of, quality of life and kind of like quantity of life in our older population. They're testing things like grip strength, and they're testing things like foot speed and leg speed. And the argument is, well, we need to know that if you fall over, can you get up? Do you have the strength to get up? And I think that's something that we take for granted, and this is something that Greg Glassman used to say all the time, is like the thing that ends up getting you put into a nursing home is because you can't get off the toilet without assistance, right? Now, standing up off the toilet is a squat. So like, if you can't squat, like you're in trouble. And it doesn't mean that, you have to be able to squat 2 times body weight to count yourself as doing a squat. But if you need someone to help you get off the couch, like that's going to get worse, not better, as you get significantly older, right? So definitely if you're kind of listening to this and you're on the fence about whether or not it's for you and your age is something that like is stopping you, then I would definitely like tell you, like, it's time to reach out, and it's only going to get harder, right? It's not going to get significantly easier. And if you're intimidated or you think that working with a coach that's in their 20s or 30s is not what you're after and there's no relatability there, well, I've got good news for you. We have a coach specifically that wants to work, with that population, and Claire's amazing, and I think that Claire is a really good example of like, you have different times where you're going to put your foot on the pedal, competitively or athletically, but there's always going to be a baseline of some sort of activity. Even when you've got 3 kids and you're moving house and you're doing a renovation, you're kind of doing all those super like adult stuff,
Super adult stuff. And in addition to having Claire as an amazing resource for us and, coach to our clients who are in that population, I think the majority of us on this call and on the coaching team have also experienced that with our own parents and seeing, what movement and proper nutrition can do for them as well. Ben, you worked with my dad and changed his life at 60 something years old. And I've been unofficially working with my mother as well. And, she's never, ever did anything remotely athletic her entire life until, health started to be a little bit compromised in her 60s. And now she's, kills it at Pilates. She eats tons more food than she used to. She goes for walks, and it's just improved her quality of life immensely. So I think having that very personal connection to those differences that it can make just makes us that much more passionate about it as well.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot really with that general population, where we see as you do kind of come through your 20s and into your 30s and into your 40s, like your health starts to just take a few sort of steps down your priority list, right? And I guess we want to encourage that just because you notice that health is maybe 7 or 8 on your list of top 5 things to do, like it's not even in sight at the moment, that we can't help bring that up a few rungs, and maybe that for some people just means you walk around the block every day and it takes 5 minutes, like that's how we start. It doesn't have to be from 0 to hero. But again, I feel like we're maybe getting pulled off a little bit, but maybe we can give some examples of different protocols that we are seeing kind of affect populations at both ends. And for me, probably the biggest one that I've been playing with is like refeeds, right? So refeeds, diet breaks, I would call them anything except cheat days, because again, it's not cheating, right? When we're kind of accounting for everything that's going on. And again, it's not a license to, as I say to a few of my men in their 40s, like this is not a license to eat like an asshole, right? Like this is still controlled. It's just, we're doing this for a purpose. And I think the more that I kind of experiment on myself primarily, and then with clients secondary, and then with my athletic clients secondary, and then with more Gen Pop clients, we actually see things like refeeds be a really good way to encourage when we've got, quite a large amount of weight to lose, and we're buying in that we're going to do that over a significant amount of time for a lot of like the psychological reasons, right? So, we understand the nature of caloric deficit and how that's, something that really needs to be focused on. But I think there's a lot to be said for not having like, how many times do you sit down with someone for an initial intake who's been like trying to lose weight for 4 or 5 years, right? Like, it's like, that is just way too long to be like, you have to be out of calories by that point if you're always like cutting calories down, right? So we know that there has to be other ways to stimulate body composition change or fat loss that still involves a caloric deficit, but doesn't involve removing more and more and more, from what you're eating. And obviously increasing your activity is one way that we can do that. But having periods of time where the amount of deficit varies, or having periods of time when you're not actually in a deficit, is actually going to help us sustain that weight loss, amount long term, right? And keep it off ultimately, which is the ultimate goal, right? Like within the community, we're pretty good at losing weight, but we're shocking at like keeping that weight off once we've done that. And it's because of the measures and the timeframes and stuff normally that get undertaken as part of a weight loss journey. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, the 2 things or the 3 things that maybe stand out the most is using things like diet breaks or refeeds or whatever to give clients, even just a psychological break from feeling like they're being limited or restricted in their choice or the amount of the things that they can eat that they actually enjoy, rather than just being on macros all the time, right? Mm-hmm. But the 2 other things which up is obviously like hydration is a huge one. Regardless of whether you're athletic or not, like we can all benefit probably from drinking more water. Good job, Mags. I've got mine here as well. Yeah, perfect. See, practice what we preach. And the 3rd one is sleep. And we're reading Why We Sleep at the moment by like Matthew Walker as part of our book club. And like, I'm only a quarter of the way through and I'm already like scared and terrified too, like primarily, but secondarily, I'm like, I'm going to make every one of my clients read this book. Like, I think there's a lot of, and you see with like your athletes who will drink 4 liters a day without really blinking twice, and they are sleeping like 8 to 9 hours. Like that's why they're where they're at. It's not that you get to where you're at and then you start focusing on eating better and, hydrating more and sleeping more. It's the other way around. It's the fact that you eat properly and you stay adequately hydrated and you're getting a minimum amount of sleep every day that you're able to continually perform at such a high level for an extended period of time. So those are probably my 3 biggest that I, make sure get pushed down the spectrum to, and obviously what it looks like and the amounts are going to differ. But the premise remains the same.
I think a big one that I would add onto that, or I guess kind of ties in with mainly sleep, is stress. Because a lot of people come to us and have poor sleeping habits or poor sleep quality, sleep time, unable to sleep, that sort of thing. And it's one thing to say, all right, you need to get more sleep, but, getting to the root of that cause as to why they're not sleeping, for a large majority of people that I've worked with, and, myself included, and close friends and family, has been that stress piece. So, it goes way beyond just what you're eating. It's also how you're managing everything else that's going on in your life. I think is really important. And especially this past year has shown us that.
And I think to your point earlier, when we talked about like, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to go from zero to being like an elite athlete, but some of those things like sleep, hydration, stress management can be those little things that make a huge difference, right? Like those are the big rocks that we can address first. And if you're sleeping well, if you're hydrating and you're waking up a lot better, you're feeling better, you're going to be more likely to go to the gym. You're going to be more likely to be excited to make that like healthier breakfast. Like I think those big things can also set yourself up well from like a habit perspective throughout your kind of day and your week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's the thing that always not surprises me, but I always forget how little time it actually takes to notice improvement, and I'll often say to new clients, like, you just need to give me 2 weeks. If you give me these 2 weeks, I promise after that 2 weeks, it'll be so much easier because you'll already be feeling better and your motivation to continue to do what's making you feel better will increase, right? And I think that's, you're right, Laura. Like, I think that's something that even Matthew Walker says in his book, or maybe it was on the podcast, that like your idea of relatively how you're feeling is only relative to how badly you're feeling. So if you're used to feeling like shit, well, then feeling like shit is a good day for you because that's just what your kind of benchmark is. But once you start to get a bit more sleep, eat a little bit better, maybe be a little bit more active, and you're waking up and you're feeling refreshed and you're feeling motivated, all of a sudden you realize that you've been spending so much time at like this lower level frequency, or kind of just like drifting through, partially absent-minded. It doesn't take much for you, like, oh, I feel good, I want to keep doing the things that are making me feel good,
Yep, surreal, in the right direction. But
exactly.
I guess to that point, it can also go in the wrong direction. And when we find ourselves going in that wrong direction, sometimes those big things, like to your point, sleep, hydration, if we can just focus on those then and start getting it going in the right direction, it's a lot easier to kind of get back to what we were doing and get back to feeling good that way too, right? It doesn't have to be on Monday we cut out all things that are terrible in our diet kind of thing. It can be some of those bigger, easier items like sleep, water, that can start getting us in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe that's another thing to touch on too, is I will steer my clients away from like this idea of clean eating, and I think that there's the reason for that is because like change that comes from huge overhaul generally doesn't last, right? But small steps in the right direction is how you kind of complete a marathon. So yeah, we know that there's going to be more benefit coming from more nutrient dense foods. And again, with our athletic population, we can take that a step further and look at the specifics of specific foods around performance and recovery and timing and all the rest of it. But for my, clients that are non-athletic, if I tell them they can't eat ice cream, or if you have here's my favorite example, because I'm working with a friend of mine, Rocky, who's super Italian. If I told him he can't eat pasta, right? Like, how do you think that's going to fall into his like family occasions, social circle, when culturally like so much of what they do is surrounded by that element of food, right? And I think that people are maybe intimidated or scared to get started because they're worried that we're going to take away all these things from them. And in fact, it's the opposite. What we want to say is, let's pay a little bit more attention to the serving size of the pasta, but maybe fill the rest of the plate up with including these other things, as opposed to like always taking things away. That perspective, that mindset is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think if the only thing that you really need to get started, whether your journey is to be a high performing, top of your field on the world stage athlete, or just to improve your health and be a little bit more conscious of the choices you're making, is an open mind where you're willing to maybe learn new things, try new things, be willing to make mistakes and be okay with that. Like, if that's all you have, we can work with that across the board, wherever you are on that spectrum of non-athletic to super athletic population, right?
and having the trust in your coach that they have your best interests and goals in mind too. I feel like, you know, the highly competitive athletic population needs to know that we know how serious they are about their sport, and we're going to support them to get there. But on the flip side, somebody who might not identify as athletic, you know, needs to trust in us that we're not going to treat them like they're trying to go to the Olympics, right? And that we're not going to push them way out of their comfort zone. It's
not a one size fits all approach, right? I think you need to remember too, like our goal, like our whole business is set up to help you achieve your goals, right? Like we're on your team. It's better for us if you do well. Like it's not good for us if you don't do well. And so why would the things that we're telling you to do, we're not telling you to do them because like we're trying to punish you, right? It's like you've come to us and you've said, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, and I'm not quite sure how to get there. So our job is to help you kind of build that roadmap, you know? And sometimes with the experience that we have, we're able to say, listen, this is a road that's probably a bit longer than you anticipate. But at the same time, like it's in our best interest for you to succeed and to achieve your goal. And we've had plenty of conversations about goals can change over the timeline that we're working together, and circumstances and things can change, and that's all fine. But whatever we're working towards, like as your coach, like, you know, we want you to succeed from a business front, but too, when you work for someone for 6 to 12 months, you know, you want your friends to succeed, you know, and ultimately, like when you're working with someone that closely for an extended period of time, you can't help but develop, you know, a level of closeness and a relationship there. It's sad when you've worked with a client for like 12 months and they're ready to, you know, fly the nest, right? And you're like your dad, Mags, is a prime example. Like, I miss him. Sometimes my Thursdays 2:00, I'm like, I wonder what he's doing, you know? And I think that's the best part of the job for us is like, our job is literally like helping people believe in themselves enough to want to go and achieve the things that they're looking to achieve, regardless of what that is or where that falls on the spectrum. And we get this huge client base that we've been running essentially tests on for the last 6 years that the next client benefits from. And then their experience helps the next client. And then their experience helps the next client, right? And I think that is, again, a benefit of MTMM is we are now 5 coaches strong. So you're not just benefiting from all the clients that I've worked with, but my clients are now benefiting from all the clients that you two have also worked with, right? And I think that that's something that we probably don't press enough as well. But no offense to anyone out there, but your circumstances probably aren't something we haven't seen before, no matter how athletic you are. So, or what your athletic realm is. I'm not quite sure how we became to have such a massive endurance community within our community, seeing as like the furthest I've ever run is like 15K, and like doing a triathlon is not on my spectrums of things that I want to do. But man, we've had people do Ironman and marathons and triathlons and ultra marathons. And it's just like those clients that it's, you know, the nutrition protocol, like we're learning so much from them. And again, we learn different things that, maybe this is something that's worked here that I can then actually apply over here as well in some different regard. And I think that brings us full circle.
Yeah. You always do that well. Yeah. Well, this is great. I think, you know, it gives us it gives everyone listening good insight into what the entire community looks like, and also just highlights for us like the resources that we have available as well, right, as coaches. And it's really cool to think about all of the different communities, populations that we've touched and continue to touch and will touch in the future. And yeah, really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's a nice mix of obviously anecdotal evidence of what we're seeing, but then, you know, everyone's kind of pursuing their own external education as well. And like I've said a few times, Kat doing her master's has been the best thing for me because I'm able to get access to all that information and all that knowledge without having to do any of that like group assignment work, which like would just do my head in. So, you know, it's not that we're just like, oh, I'm making protocols up, but we're kind of getting, well, here's what the field's demonstrating. Here's what the textbooks are saying. How do we apply that? And then once we've applied that, has this actually worked in practical as it should have worked in theory? Yes or no? How do we need to amend going forward? Right.
Yeah. So. Excellent. Well, if anybody has any questions about anything that we touched on, or, you know, about their specific community or sport, we're always here answer your questions. And if there's a topic that we could expand on in a coaches chat, I'd love to do so. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Ben and Laura, for joining today.
Dogs made her way in.
But yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks, guys. Well, girls, thanks, team. Thanks all.
For learning.